So probably I'll need you guys to warm up your fingers. If you like to unmute, okay, sure, be my guest. So first thing, I'd like you to, with the exception of Erica, okay, for the boys, okay, last week was a lecture test, right? Okay, and the week earlier, okay, we actually covered a specific topic. Okay, can you all remember or recall what was the topic that was covered? Okay, we'll do a quick recap. Then we'll proceed with a quiz. Erica, do me a favor, tilt your cam a little bit downwards, okay, so that I can observe your facial expression. Thanks. Boys, come on. What was covered the week before? Come on. Cannot remember. One of you guys seems to have a very short-term memory. We covered what? I'll give you a hint. You can actually, okay, great. Someone finally brought up ADAS. Okay, so what have we learned in AD and AS? Hey, Erica, if you have learned AD and AS in school, you can also participate. Okay, maybe you just type out anything that you recall from AD and AS. And from the rest of, for the boys, do not refer to the notes. I want you guys to recall from here. Okay, anytime when you recall from notes is probably not so good in terms of concepts. Okay, you probably did not understood the concept. Okay, so what have I covered in AD and AS? Okay, so someone brought up AD is equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Right, so Dylan, what was covered? And Erica, has your school covered AD and AS already? Kind of?
Only the front part.
Are you sure? Then in that case, I wish you all the best for today's class. Yeah. Okay, boys, what else? Okay, factors of AD and AS. Okay, sure. Okay, so AD, these are the few factors. AS, of course, you're looking at primarily the factor of productions for the entire economy. Okay, so I do not want to spend too much time to recall AD and AS. Okay, for the viewers out there, okay, I will insert a card, okay, of the previous topic that was covered. Okay, so check the card or check the link below, okay, for the topic that was previously covered. So I would like to assess all your content knowledge on AD and AS. Okay, so I'm going to paste a Kahoot link. Oh, copy link to share. Okay, I'm going to put it on the chat function. Everyone, okay, please join me. And meanwhile, I would like you guys to note which question you get wrong. Okay. Okay, so Mr. Teo has shrunk to even smaller. This is to help you guys to see clearer. Alright, okay, so once we are ready, okay, three of you are in. All the best, good luck, let's go. Okay, so a government spending on infrastructure will cause a simultaneous increase in AD and AS. Okay, because infrastructure is capital, is public capital accumulation in the long run. So there will be more FOP in the long run. Okay, so AS curve will shift out as well. For those who brought in AD alone, okay, not good enough. Okay, so pay attention to additional keywords that are involved. Okay, good. Okay, I'm going to move on. Alright, so you realize that the AS curve looks slightly different from what we have learned. Okay, so this is a simplified form of AS curve. Okay, some of the schools use that. In fact, very few schools use that. Most of the schools use a bowl-shaped AS curve. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so the point here is what causes the AS curve to experience a leftward shift. Okay, so you realize that the import price, okay, is the correct answer. Why? Okay, because it's related to today's topic on inflation. Okay, so the assumption is, okay, the country is importing raw materials from the rest of the world. Okay, and therefore, when there's an increase in the import price, okay, the imported cost of production is going to go up. Okay, the AS curve is going to shift to the left. Okay, so pay attention to keywords such as import and cost. Okay. Unfortunately, none of y'all get it right. Okay, so this is a shift. Great, everyone is getting that right. Hey, focus on government spending on education, right? That's my hint for all of you. Right, increase in investment will lead to higher AD, CIGX minus M. Increase on government spending on education, right? Education means what? Higher productivity for workers. Okay, so in the short run, G will go up. In the long run, your AS curve will experience a rightward shift. So cumulatively, okay, the correct answer is B. Okay, B is on the right hand side of point X. Okay, after undergoing a simultaneous shift. Okay, so increase for AD to shift to the left, you realize that to promote household savings, this will dampen consumption. Okay, so the rest of the answers is going to increase your AD. Okay, so do note that savings and consumption is like a seesaw. Okay, when there's higher savings, there will be lower consumption. Right, so the correct answer for rightward shift in AD is it must be a higher consumption. And the rest is not going to affect AD or it's going to affect AS. It's going to cause your AD to go shift to the left or it's going to affect AS. Okay, so boom in consumer spending, higher C. Okay, this is a very straightforward answer. Okay, well done, Dylan for leading. Right, interest rate and investments, they are inversely related. So when one goes up, the other will go down. Right? Okay, so most of the students pick the yellow option, right? The yellow option is an indirect tax. Tax on goods is an indirect tax. It's highly related to what was announced this week, okay, by Minister Wong, okay, on the GST. Okay, so GST is an indirect tax. It will drive up your cost of production. AS curve will shift upwards. Okay, so an increase in income tax is a direct tax. Okay, it will lower disposable income, purchasing power, and consumption. So you have to differentiate these two types of tax. First one is direct, and the second one is indirect. It affects the AD and AS differently. Seems like this question caught everyone with their pants down. It's actually pretty straightforward. Your real national income is equals to your C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So all you need to do is just to balance out, okay, the one of the four options. Option 3, C, is the correct one. Right, this is my science class, but strangely, math is not like the strongest suit. I don't know why. Okay, last question already. Alright, so you realize that if you want to move from X to Y, okay, it's a movement along the AD, it has to be satisfied with an outward shift in the AS curve in order to cut at Y. Okay, so the outward shift of the AS curve is going to be satisfied by higher productivity of workers. Then this will lead to lower cost of production. Okay, so the rest, okay, is not going, the first two is going to affect AD. The yellow is going to drive up your cost of production. Only the green option is correct. Okay, so a good try, Erica. Hey, the boys have been with me. Why Why is it so strange? Why is Zach higher than Erica? Despite scoring lesser, right? Why is that? Maybe speed also plays a part. Okay, so with that, okay, I will close this. And I will move on to our lesson for the day. Okay, so having said that, right, if you have a question for me, okay, you can put up you can raise your hand. Okay, can you all see the raise hand function? Yep. Okay, and then I will ask you to unmute, okay, and ask question. Okay, if not, you can type it out on the chat function. Okay, and let me know what kind of questions you'd like to ask. Okay, they are not sure. Remember, okay, your investment into the program is an access to me. Okay, so for the other viewers who are watching this clip from other media channels, okay, if you have a question for me, please drop down in the comment segment. Okay, if I have chance, I will address that. Okay, so for the live viewers out here, my live students, okay, these are the 6 objectives that we will be covering today. So I'd just like to have a quick show of hands. Who has not learned inflation? All learn inflation already? Not learn inflation. Okay, very honest. Half. What is half? What does half stand? I see someone like that. Not sure. Okay, or maybe sleeping in class. I don't know. Okay, but anyway. Okay, let's go through the lesson objectives today. There are 6 objectives. First one, okay, is causes of inflation. Cost of inflation, COST. Some of the schools will also relate this concept to consequence and concerns. Sure. And we will be briefly addressing policies to deal with inflation. Okay, the next half of the class will be dealing with deflation. Okay, so deflation is the better sister of inflation. Both of them are equally undesirable. Okay, I'll explain in a short while. So we will be going through this format again. Causes, costs, policies. So when you revise your school notes, make sure you break down your revision to this treehouse. Okay, I just want to make a disclaimer. Okay, our strength is content summary. Our strength is never to go in depth. Okay, so I will point out to you, okay, which part of what I'm going to go through is going to be important, okay, from the book. Okay, and if there's anything that you are not sure, okay, within the book or your school notes, okay, for the actual students in our program, okay, please ping me, WhatsApp me, okay, I will address them privately with you. Okay, for the rest of the viewers, okay, just drop under the comment segment. Maybe if I have chance, I will address that. Is everyone clear? Okay, so with that, okay, I am going to move on to the first goal, okay, of the day, which is, or the first problem that we'll be learning, inflation. Okay, so if you have your book, okay, please stand by your book. Okay, we will be making notes directly via the book. Okay, so if you have the book, please wave to the camera so that I know that you're ready. Okay. So let's look at page 71. Okay, so 71 actually gives you a snapshot of the 4 goals. Economic growth, price stability. For the H2 students, will be learning BOP, okay, and full employment. So all of you have to know that the reverse of each goal will be the problem, right? Okay, so for today, we'll be learning inflation. Okay, it is the direct contrast of price stability. Okay, inflation and deflation is the direct contrast of price stability. Right, so the definitions can be found in the book, okay, under Okay, the macro side. Okay, I believe it's page 165. Okay, you can flip to page 165. Is it 165? Page 163. Okay, inflation. Okay, so your definition for inflation, it has to be a sustained increase in your GPL over a given time period. So most of the students, they often miss out this, okay, over a given time period, right? And sustained or persistent is used interchangeably. Okay, if you put increase in general price level, some of the schools will mark you wrong. Okay, so make sure you include these two words, okay, in your definition. Now I'm going to move on to the next part, okay, which is on page 75. Okay, so how do we measure, okay, inflation? Okay, we will be using your consumer price index. I'm not going to go through how to construct the basket. Okay, I think it has very little exam value. Okay, the purpose of this course is to bring out what is going to be testable and what is not unlikely to be tested. So I'm just going to stick to those that I have seen before. Okay, that is going to be more practical. Okay, so consumer price index, okay, it actually measures the level of prices of a basket of goods and services. So the next one that I'm going to cover is exceptionally important. How do we calculate rate of inflation? So sometimes, especially in case studies, okay, they will review what is CPI. Okay, they'll give you a table. Okay, and especially for trend comparison question or trend description question, you're supposed to illustrate, okay, what happens to the rate of inflation. Okay, so I expected to tabulate. So I'm just going to quickly run through. Okay, just like what we have learned under your your economic growth. Okay, your economic growth, you can actually calculate using your GDP figures. Okay, so we have CPI of your current year. Okay, let's say if you want to calculate your rate of inflation for 2022. Okay, we will have your CPI of 2022 subtracting CPI of 2021 dividing CPI of 2021 times 100%. So this is how you get your rate of inflation for that particular year. So I'm going to go through some additional concepts that is widely tested in case study. Please jot this down. Okay, the first concept, okay, that's related to CPI is called what we call base year. Okay, so you have to know that this is related to the concept is related to how we tabulate real GDP. Okay, so a base year tells us that, okay, it's reference to arbitral base year of, let's say, 2015. Okay, so that year probably that they experience price stability. So we will be taking reference from that year. Okay, so your base year is always 100. Okay, so some of the students that ask me, Mr. Teo, is previous year the same as base year? Okay, not necessarily the same. Okay, so the base year in this case could be 2015. So unless, okay, they want you to calculate the rate of inflation for 2016, then you can use 2016 minus the base year, okay, over the base year. Okay, so this is the only instance that, okay, it fits nicely. Okay, so do not be mistaken, okay, that the base year is the previous year. So the last thing that you need to know about the base year is its nature of 100. Okay, so whenever calculations involves the base year, okay, you do not really need to look into the denominator, because anything divided by 100, okay, is going to give you the same amount times 100 back. Okay, it is only when it is not the base year, then it's going to be a bit more tricky. Make sure you divide accordingly. Now, don't simply subtract alone. Is everyone following me? Okay, so CPI okay, can be tested. So in any case, if you don't understand what I'm saying, okay, just pay attention to current and previous. Okay, then you'll get the rate of change. You can put aside the base year. Okay, the base year has very little exam value. Alright, okay, I am going on to the first topic of the day, okay, which is causes of inflation. If you forget everything that I have mentioned so far, okay, please do not forget this. I will be asking you, what are the causes? What are the types of inflation? When I ask that, I do expect these two answers. demand pull and cost push inflation. Okay, please put a star. Very, very important. When we study the rest of the macro goals or the macro problems, we will be adopting the same approach. Unemployment, okay, we'll be looking at the different types of unemployment. Economic growth, we are looking at the components of economic growth. Okay, balance of payment for my H2 students, we'll be looking at the various accounts. Okay, so it's not too different for inflation. Demand pull and cost push. So I'm going to move on, okay, to how do we quickly categorize whether is it demand pull or cost push. So we note that there is going to be an increase in general price level, especially a sustained increase in the general price level, okay, for your for both demand pull and cost push. So, okay, let's look at demand pull. Okay, demand pull, we are looking at changes in your demand, right? It has to be related to demand. So, which direction of your AD will it be shifting in order to satisfy a sustained increase in your general price level? Okay, so quite obvious, it has to be a persistent rightward shift in the AD. Persistent rightward shift. So getting the direction right is exceptionally crucial. Okay? Later on I'll go through the graphical illustration, but I just want you all to have a good sense of direction. So for the AS side, it is slightly a bit more tricky, okay, because I've mentioned 2 weeks before that in AD and AS that your AS curve can shift 4 directions: up, down, left, right. Okay, so you want to pay attention to which one is going to be shifting, SR or LRAS. If it is your SRAS, it has to be satisfied with what? Come, type it out. Okay, which direction should your SRAS curve be shifting? Pardon me if the dog barks, she's just right below me. I was trying hard to keep her from the room, but because I'm recording. Yeah, so for inflation to happen, what must which direction will your SRAS? Okay, your Keynesian part of your AS curve has to shift upwards. Okay, likewise for your LRAS, okay, the classical part, it has to experience a leftward shift. Especially for AS curve, it's kind of tricky, so make sure you get the direction right. You need to identify the components correctly. Okay, so only these 3 circumstances will result in inflation to happen. And later on when we learn deflation is the opposite of the rest, opposite of all of this. Is everyone clear so far? Direction? Alright, I'm going to move on to demand pull inflation. Alright, so for demand pull inflation, I'm going to skip all of this. Okay, all these causes are not going to be covered today, okay, because I've covered 2 weeks back in AD and AS. Okay, so any components of AD that leads to an increase in CIGX minus M will satisfy the condition of inflation. So I'm going to cover the graphical illustration. Okay, I just want you all to pay attention to these 3 things. Okay, number 1, key assumption. Alright, so when I mention demand pull inflation, there must be a key assumption that is satisfied in order for demand pull inflation from happening. Does anybody know? What's the key assumption that must be satisfied? This is the most important one. Okay, please jot this down. Please write this down in the book. Okay, good, Zach. Okay, so you have to assume that spare capacity is exhausted. Okay, so Zach, your definition of full capacity is not complete. Okay, because the intermediate region, okay, will also drive up general price level. Okay, so spare capacity is exhausted means that, okay, the horizontal part, okay, we are completely exhausted. We are moving up the intermediate region of the AS curve. Okay, so make sure this condition is satisfied, and whenever demand pool inflation question is tested, insert this assumption. Spare capacity must be fully exhausted. Okay, the next diagram illustration that you need to be concerned about, okay, is persistent or sustained increase. So some schools have the additional requirement of showing another shift here. Okay, so refer to your school notes, especially when they show inflation. Do they show one-time shift or two-time shift? Okay, if they show one-time shift, then probably one-time shift is good enough. Okay, but most of the schools advocate two-time shift. So you guys can insert this diagram here as well, okay, additional shift. In any case, if you are not sure, just draw twice. So far so good with the illustration. Alright, so from the graphical perspective, okay, make sure you draw it at the intermediate region. So this is going to be consistent with both AD and AS. Okay, later on for cost push inflation, you realize that intermediate region is going to be very useful. Alright, I can't recall what's the last one. Maybe when I recall that, I'll come back to here. Suddenly, when it start to age, when the dog comes in to disturb you, then you, crap, forget it. Okay, is everyone good with this three illustration? Okay, spare capacity is exhausted. Okay, it has to be a persistent increase in your price level, at least twice. Okay, and if you are totally clueless on how to draw, okay, make sure you illustrate the changes in the AD at the intermediate region. Good enough. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the AS side, or the cost push inflation side. Like I've said, I'm not going to cover all the other causes here, okay, because these are all pure content that is not that significant, okay, so long as you understand what causes AD to increase. Alright, cost push inflation is slightly more tricky. Okay, but we are going to adopt the same approach. So number one, okay, sustained increase. Shift twice. Okay, you can draw this if your school uses this approach. Okay, number two, okay, it all occurs around the intermediate region. Okay, why do I advocate on intermediate region? Okay, if you realize that, okay, for instance, if you draw your AD on the left side, just now demand pool inflation, right? If you draw your AD increasing on the left side, when spare capacity is not exhausted, then there will not be increase in general price level. Do you see that? Okay, it's going to still be at P0. Okay, likewise, okay, for the AS side, if you realize that your AD is significantly high up, okay, cutting the classical region, no matter how you shift your SRAS, okay, it's not going to change your price level. That's why, okay, the simplified assumption is everything happening at the intermediate region. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly cover these two types of short run cost push inflation. Oh yes, okay, very important. Short run and long run cost push inflation. Okay, so it's categorized with an upward shift in your SRAS or leftward shift in your LRAS. So in case studies, you are expected to identify whether this is a short run or long run. Okay, the question will not tell you is SR or L. You have to decipher yourself. So what is the key determinant or differentiating point between SR and LR? What did I mention 2 weeks back? No, I'm just praying very hard that my dog doesn't bark. If not, all of you will go deaf because my mic is blasted at the full. Come on, what is the key differentiating point between SR and LR? Okay, we see that your LR revolves around what? Changes in your full employment output, right? Okay, and your SR, okay, your full employment output does not change. So using this, okay, the simplified differentiating point that I have mentioned 2 weeks back, okay, is the differentiating point between cost of production versus factor of production. So you realize that if there is a change in cost of production, it's likely to be short run. For instance, changes in wage costs, changes in import costs, right? It does not affect your full employment output. Okay, whereas when you look at FOP, we are looking at permanent changes in your quantity and quality of FOP. Okay, so you have to differentiate the two. So I'm just going to cover these two. Okay, I'm not going to cover wage, I'm going to cover these two. Just now in the quiz, we actually realized that there's imported cost push inflation, right? Okay, so please make a mental note, okay, in this one. This one is the most widely tested cost push inflation. Whenever you see changes in price of energy, fuel, utilities, it is very highly likely that there is presence of cost push inflation, especially short run. Okay, when there is changes in your production costs, because energy, fuel, utilities will affect your production costs, especially if you are importing them from other countries. Okay, so make a mental note. You have to be exceptionally sensitive to these three. All right. Last week, or rather earlier this week, Minister Wong mentioned something, right? Have you all caught up with the budget? Did you all stay in school to watch? Yeah, because it doesn't concern you. Okay, but I can assure you that it's going to concern you in a short while. So, if you read the headlines of the newspaper, what was mentioned by Minister Wong? It used to be Minister Heng, then he changed to Minister Wong as the finance minister. Come on, hey, this is current affairs. What is in the headline of newspaper? Okay, what we call GST hikes, right? So statutory, or some of the schools use tax push inflation, okay, refers to what? An indirect tax, GST. Okay, so make sure, okay, you can relate, okay, tax push inflation to GST. Okay, so this is also related to our earlier quiz. All right. Okay, this is a tax that is going to be borne by the producer. Alright, for the rest of them, okay, you realize that your school notes will have different forms of cost push inflation. Okay, some of them will be same with the book, some of them will not be same. It doesn't matter. If there's anything that I can help, okay, just ping me, especially for my students. I'm going to move on to the long run. Okay, so for the long run, okay, likewise, it has to satisfy the earlier criteria of these two. It has to be sustained. Okay, make sure you're going to shift your LRAS curve twice and show that there's an increase in your general price level. Sustain. Okay, and if you're ever confused where to draw at the intermediate region. Right? So likewise, the extract or the preamble will not tell you that there is long run or rather there is cost push inflation that affects the LRAS. So you have to decipher yourself, right? So the examples that I use here, okay, they are like natural disaster, okay, a war, okay, this will deplete when people are killed, when factories are bombed, okay, it will deplete your FOP. But there is actually one more that is widely used, okay, in modern days. Okay, so especially for my H2 students, you may want to write this down. Brain drain. Okay, so this is a concept that is used in globalization. But H1 students can also copy this down, okay, because this is a very it's a global phenomenon. So what does brain drain means? Does anybody know what's brain drain? What happens when a country experiences brain drain? Does it mean that the brain fluid flows outwards? Okay, type out your understanding in the chat if you know. Okay, that's how you participate and how you improve. Okay, so if you're ever, just type out. The more you type, the more you'll benefit from the program. Alright, so brain drain simply means that there is sorry Zach, okay, that is not that's a good shot, but it's not how brain drain works. So it simply means that there is an attrition or loss of the higher skilled workers, okay, from a country. Attrition or loss. Okay, so there could be a push and pull factor. For instance, when there are better employment opportunities in other countries, then this is a pull factor. Okay, and if the country has political or any form of instability, right, like what we see in Hong Kong, okay, there is a lot of instability in Hong Kong, political instability, or Malaysia, okay, when there is a favoritism to the Bumiputras, right? So you realize that there is a loss of Chinese workers, okay, to the rest of the world. That's why you see a lot of Malaysians coming to Singapore to work. So this is an important phenomenon, okay, and this will lead to a contraction in your LRAS, okay, and it will exert an upward pressure on your price level. Is everyone clear how brain drain works? Yeah, so for my H2 students, I'll cover this in depth in the future. Put a mental note. Alright, so far I have covered the graphical illustration of demand pull and cost push. Are there any things that you guys are not sure that you want to ask me? So you realize that there are a lot of subtypes, okay, so especially for cost push inflation, don't be too daunted by that, okay, so long as you can identify this temporary and permanent, okay, then you can quickly relate to whether it affects short run and long run. So I'm going to move on to the more confusing part, okay, of cost of inflation. So please make a mental note on this page. Alright, so for cost, like I've said, sometimes they don't use cost, they use consequence. Okay, they use consents. So this is the part where a lot of students, okay, will mess up because they don't know what the question is asking. So it's very specific. Okay, what is going to be the concern? Why are government concerned about inflation? What is undesirable inflation? Okay, so learn to paraphrase. So some of the students, when they are tested with cause, consequence, and concerns, they use the first approach of causes. Okay, that's straight wrong. Okay, so make sure, okay, you're familiar with this approach. So I'm just going to quickly share how you should study. Okay, not what you should study. Okay, so please take down these tips. When you revise your school notes, you realize that there's going to be a lot. Okay, so make sure you're able to categorize them, okay, into consumer, producer, and government. Okay, break them down into economic agents. That's the first tip that I have. The second tip that I have is familiarize yourself with the first or the second or two each. Okay, because it is very unlikely that you'll be tested the same scenario in case study. So you just need to be familiar, especially for my H2 students. Okay, they may ask you in essay, then you need to vomit out in essay. But for H1 students, there is very, very case study centric. So you never know which one is going to be tested. Is everyone good on how to revise? Alright, the third part that you need to be familiar with is the paper clip here. Okay, in our notes, I always insert the paper clip for you guys to take note. So the concept down here can be tested in the reverse. If they are not concerned about consequence, cause, okay, and concern, they will be testing you on what is desirable about achieving a goal. Okay, so if you understood cause, consequence, and cause approach, all you need to do is just to flip the arrows here. Okay, don't need to memorize a separate set. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly illustrate, okay, how is one of the factors going to work. Okay, maybe I'll combine these two. Okay, and likewise, if there's anything that you're not sure within the content that you don't know how to explain, just drop me a private ping, especially for my students. Okay, I'll address that. So one of the famous consequence for inflation, okay, that you need to relate is fall in purchasing power. So the example that I often use is this. Okay, let's say all of your pocket money is $100, right? Okay, and you consume fast food every day, $5. Okay, how many meals you can consume? 20 meals a week. Agreed? So how does inflation comes into the picture? Inflation comes into the picture when your fast food prices or your general price level goes up. And this erodes your purchasing power. Do you see that? Okay, there's no change in your income. Okay, but on a real basis, you're going to afford lesser goods and services. So inflation erodes your purchasing power. Please memorize this E word. It normally comes in with purchasing power. There's an erosion of your purchasing power. So what's the significance of erosion of your purchasing power? Then you can see that when purchasing power is eroded, okay, you can afford lesser goods and services. Okay, your material standard of living will be worsened. Okay, the alternate approach is, remember, you can also relate to savings. Okay, the amount of savings that you put in the bank is going to be eroded, right? So the value of your real savings, okay, is going to go down. And when your real savings goes down, okay, you're going to afford lesser goods and services in the future. Okay, I'm so sorry, I'm blocking already. And your future material standard of living, okay, is going to be worsened. So this is how you want to potentially argue, okay, or establish your point. So I do not recommend students to anyhow BS down here. Okay, because cause, consequence, concerns, they are very precise. It's either you know or you don't. Okay, so make a star on this page. Very, very important. I'm going to show you how to utilize the paperclip. So let's say if we want to talk about price stability. Okay, then we want to talk about what? Preservation of your purchasing power. When purchasing power is preserved, okay, you realize that you can afford your existing consumption pattern of goods and services. Then your material standard of living will be preserved. Okay, price stability does not necessitate that your purchasing power go up. Okay, it means that price is generally growing at a healthy level. Okay, so you don't lose out in the long run or in present. Likewise, okay, the amount of your real savings, okay, will remain intact. Okay, you can afford roughly the same amount of goods and services in the future, and your future standard of living will be protected. So always uncover what perspective the question is asking. If the question necessitates price stability, don't use the problem approach. Likewise for the other. Is everyone clear? You will encounter such questions, okay, so I can guarantee that you guys is going to experience some form of hiccup, okay, but make sure you can identify that. If you don't get it the first time, make sure you get it the second time, okay? So I am going to move on to the policy side. Okay, the policy side, okay, you don't need to copy this. Okay, you can copy this briefly. I'll just be brief. Alright, so I would like you guys, okay, to start to be familiar with the causes. Policies and causes are tightly related. Alright, so earlier on we have learned these two causes, right? What are the two causes that we have learned earlier on? Can you guys quickly type out, okay, so that I can access your understanding? What are the two types? I mentioned this. Causes. Good, Dylan. Zach and Erica. Without looking at your notes. Okay, good, Zach. Okay, Erica, good. So demand pull and cost push. So demand pull happens when there is excessive AD, right? Likewise, cost push happens when there is an upward shift in your SRAS or a leftward shift in your LRAS. Agreed? Getting the direction right is exceptionally crucial. So, whenever you propose a policy, make sure you know what is the root symptom of the problem. Okay, please write this down. You have to know what is the root symptom or what is the root cause of the problem. So I always share with my earlier batches. Okay, you can see yourself like a doctor. When the question tests you from the perspective of being a doctor, right? You're supposed to deduce the symptom and prescribe the correct medicine. So what do you consume when you have a headache? We consume Panadol, right? Painkiller. Okay, likewise, when you have stomach ache, okay, you eat charcoal pill, right? Agreed? So do you consume charcoal pill, okay, when you have a headache? Don't make sense. It doesn't solve the problem. Okay, or probably it could solve the problem, but it could take a significantly longer time. I don't necessarily mean it cannot. Some of the drugs, okay, they go in the indirect route. Panadol is like the drug of miracle, okay, solve everything. But does it address diarrhea immediately? It doesn't. Okay, so always identify the drug that deals with the problem directly. So if the problem is excessive AD, you realize that AD is increasing. Okay, what policy should we recommend here in order to address increasing AD? We have to lower demand, right? Okay, so the act of lowering demand is to counteract the arrow earlier on. So this is what we know as a contractionary demand side policies. Contractionary. Okay, when there is too much economic activities, okay, you slow down AD, contractionary. The opposite will be expansionary demand side policies. Okay, so this is another pitfall. A lot of students, when they don't understand, they memorize. And sometimes they prescribe the wrong medicine. So if we liken this to a diarrhea, okay, you're already having diarrhea, AD increasing. And you because of you don't understand the concept, you just memorize and blurt out the expansionary demand side policy. You promote more AD. Okay, the drug that you are prescribing is a laxative. Okay, it will kill the patient. Agreed? So make sure, okay, you can deduce what is the problem first. Too much economic activity, slow it down. Demand side policy, contractionary. Okay, likewise, you can see that for changes in your AS curve, you want to promote supply side policy. Okay, normally supply side policy does not have the concept of expansionary or contractionary. Okay, just generally supply side policies is good enough. Okay, when I go on to supply side policy, I will address specific policies that will shift down your SRAS or shift right your LRAS, okay, to counteract the effects of inflation. Okay, have I made myself clear? Alright, okay, so I'm going to quickly move on to deflation. Okay, deflation is harder. Okay, so I often tell my students, especially the year 2s, if the school wants to test you on concept, they test inflation. If the school wants to test you on conceptual gaps, they'll test you on deflation. Okay, so know what's the flavor of your school. So, some of you may be asking, Mr. Teo, why is deflation no good? Isn't a fall in price good? Why is fall in price no good? Anybody wants to try? Especially for those who have learned. I know there are students here who have learned already. Especially the H1 students. Why is a fall in price level no good? Okay, I will address this later. But now, okay, I'd like you to make a mental distinguisher. Please jot this down in the book. Deflation and disinflation. And what is the difference between the two aside from spelling? Okay, so if you want to find out where is deflation in the book, okay, you can refer to the definition page here. Okay, under definitions, okay, go to D. Okay, you want to illustrate a sustained fall in your general price level. Please add this in. Okay, so I'm so sorry. It should be a sustained or persistent fall in your general price level. So my question is, what is the difference between deflation and disinflation? Okay, you may want to put disinflation here. Okay, like I say, for the students who like to try, you can try. Okay, don't worry, Mr. Teo won't judge you. Okay, but you're going to improve the more you try. Okay, if you're staying passive, then probably you won't experience as much or improve as much as your peers who type. Okay, I'm really not asking you guys to unmute and try. Alright, just type. Okay, anything not sure, type. Alright, so aside from spelling, okay, deflation and disinflation, the key difference is deflation. Just now we mentioned this is a sustained fall in your general price level over a given time period. Disinflation does not mean that price level goes down. You realize that, okay, there is still inflation within the equation. So it simply tells you that your price level is still increasing, but at a slower rate. So we will often encounter this in case studies. Okay, I don't want to spoil you guys. Okay, but there will be a few questions that are coming out like that will catch you by surprise. Okay, so pay attention to the y-axis, especially when they tell you that it is a percentage change in your general price level. Okay, and they show you that there is a downward, your slope of your price changes is downward sloping. Only when it crosses the x-axis, then there is deflation. Anything above the x-axis or 0% must be disinflation. Okay, so make sure you can differentiate the two. And no matter how much I say, I think some students will get it wrong. Okay, so we'll fall back to the actual practice to address that. So I'm going to talk about the causes of deflation. Okay, page Itodoko. Where is that? Sorry, I have too many things on my screen. Right, okay, so here. Alright, so for deflation, I want you guys to focus on page 82 and 83. Oh yes, before I cover this, okay, I am so sorry I missed out one important thing in inflation. Alright, so I just want you guys to quickly type it out, okay, in the chat function. Type it out in the chat function. Okay, sound bro, is this is lower rate correct, Erica? Alright, so type it out in the chat function. Between demand pull inflation and cost push inflation, which do you think is a lesser of the two evil? Demand pull and cost push. If you were to make a choice between demand pull and cost push, which do you think is a lesser of the two evil? Or they are the same? Alright, okay, so quickly type out your response. Okay, I'm going to disclose the answer. Alright, so most of you guys guessed demand pull, okay, which is correct. So you realize that whenever there is a demand pull inflation, I'm just going to quickly go back here to distinguish. okay, we realize that the similarity is GPL goes up. So the differentiating point is what happens to your R and Y. Okay, so with a demand pull inflation, okay, your R and Y goes upwards. Okay, no doubt when your spare capacity is exhausted, it increases at a slower rate. Okay, when we have cost push inflation, your R and Y goes down. Okay, so if we were to talk about if we were to differentiate between the two, okay, between cost push and demand pull, then demand pull is going to be, okay, the lesser of the two evil, because there is still increase in your R and Y. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I keep forgetting all the juicy stuff. Yeah, I want to add on to the fourth requirement for demand pull inflation. I suddenly remember. Yeah, crap. Okay, so have I illustrated the key difference between demand pull and cost push already? Okay, which is the lesser of two evil. All right, so move back to demand pull inflation. I want to add the fourth ingredient. Very, very important. Okay, the fourth ingredient, in order to illustrate demand pull inflation, okay, sometimes they will ask you, how does the upward pressure of your GPL happens? Okay, there is specific terminology involved. So why is it that your GPL goes up in demand pull inflation? Okay, then you got to illustrate the concept of your spare capacity. Okay, we realize that when we have exhausted our spare capacity, okay, your FOP, do they get more scarce or less scarce? Type it out. When spare capacity is exhausted, does resource get more scarce or less scarce? More scarce, right? So we have to illustrate that because of scarcity in resources, okay, this will lead to firms bidding up factor prices. I'm so sorry of my handwriting. Scarcity. Okay, so firms, okay, will have to pay more, okay, in order to persuade a worker, for instance, to work longer hours to produce more. Okay, so you can see that the bidding out of the factor prices will translate to, okay, an upward pressure on your general price level. Some of the schools use the concept of supply side bottleneck here. Okay, bottleneck means that you're approaching the classical region. That's why it's called bottleneck. Huh? Okay, so pay attention to, especially if there is a requirement to illustrate an upward pressure on price for demand pull inflation. This is the exact terminologies to use. Alright, so I'm going to move on to deflation. I'm so sorry that I hop around. Okay, so there just now we stopped at establishing the lesser of the two evil, right? So the reason why I asked this, okay, is because for deflation it's more clear, okay, which is the lesser of the two evil. So before this, I'd like to make a disclaimer. Unlike inflation, where we have demand pull and cost push, for deflation, how we categorize in AYE, okay, we actually borrowed this concept from Hwa Chong. Okay, so only Hwa Chong and us use this concept. Okay, so if your school doesn't use this concept that I'm going to introduce later, don't use. Okay, if not, you are going to introduce more confusion. But internally, this is why I chose these two terms. All right, I chose the concept of malign and benign. So as the term suggests, one of them is a harmful deflation. The other is a harmless deflation or a healthy deflation. Benign means harmless, right? So the same concept applies. Why is it harmful? Okay, we see that for harmful deflation or malign deflation, it has to be caused by a fall in AD. Must be caused by a fall in AD. Okay, then your general price level will go down. Okay, make sure it satisfies these few conditions as what we have mentioned earlier on. Sustain. Okay, so if you want to draw another shift, be my guest. Okay, and show another round of AD falling and another round of price level falling, sure. Okay, you can keep it at the intermediate region. Alright, and okay, make sure I don't think schools is going to test you what happens when the general to illustrate why general price level goes down. Okay, but if it does happen, okay, you can use the reverse approach, okay, of spare capacity. Same, okay, because okay, when there's a fall in demand, okay, there will be a abundance of resources. Okay, then we can go on to illustrate, okay, what happens to the factor prices when they're bid downwards. Okay, but more importantly, you want to observe why is it harmful. It is exceptionally harmful because there is a simultaneous fall in your RNY. Okay, so this is the differentiating point. When we move on to benign deflation or harmless or healthy deflation, you realize that your real national income will increase as a result of a downward shift or a rightward shift in your SRAS. Okay, I'm so sorry, okay, they missed out the dotted line here, okay, please draw the dotted line. Alright, so factors that cause a downward shift or a rightward shift in your AS curve, okay, is going to result in a higher RNY together with a fall in price level. Okay, so this is not harmful, okay, this is harmless, or some of the school use healthy. That's why we use malign and benign. But if your school don't use this term, okay, you can just categorize them under AD or AS factors. Okay, AD or AS factors. Okay, is everyone clear about the illustration of demand pull and cost push? So same, not demand pull and cost push, okay, deflation. Right, so likewise, okay, you can also stick to our initial illustration of sustain. Okay, shift one more time. Likewise, shift one more time. Okay, and show the effects on the general price level. Huh? Okay, I'm going to quickly skip, okay, because the approach is fairly similar to inflation. Okay, so if you have questions for me, please type it out. Okay, I will address that. I'm going to move on to the more important part of consequence. Consequence is not in your book. Please copy this down. Alright, so consequence, concerns, and cause of deflation is hard. Okay, so widely tested as compared to inflation. So I'm going to give you 2 points. Okay, so it will be tested in the future. Okay, so please jot this down. It's not in the book. So the first cause or consequence or concern, why is deflation undesirable? Okay, is the concept of what we call postponing consumption. So this is what happens when there is deflation or deflationary expectation. Okay, so if there is a persistent fall in price level, okay, you realize that consumers will form the expectation of deflationary expectation. Right, it can fall in this time period. Does it mean that it won't fall further? It can fall further, right? So what happens when everyone, okay, is expecting future prices to fall? Let's say if you are saving money to buy a handphone, right? If you expect the phone prices to fall tomorrow, would you buy today or buy tomorrow? Type it out. You'll buy tomorrow, right? So if everyone buys tomorrow, okay, this is what we call postponing consumption. So you can actually see that, okay, the act of postponing consumption will lead to what? Now, from the firm's perspective, what is going to happen? Will firms be more profitable or less profitable when everyone starts to defer consumption? Less. So we can see this loop. Okay, when there's deflationary expectation, there will be a fall in consumption in anticipation or future fall in prices. Future price falling. And this will lead to firms being less profitable. And what happens when firms are less profitable? Do they increase in investment expenditure, or do they cut back on investment expenditure? If you are a phone manufacturer, okay, would you invest in capital stocks, okay, to produce more phones or less phones? So you can see fall in investment expenditure in anticipation, or rather due to a lower profitability. So you can see that, okay, the cumulative effect of a fall in C due to anticipation of future prices falling and fall in I, okay, will lead to what? A vicious cycle. Why? Because a fall in C and I, okay, will actualize the fall in price level. Do you see that? Okay, when C and I goes down, AD goes down, right? And this will form another round of deflationary expectation. And this cycle will repeat. So this will cause massive unemployment in the country. Okay, when deflationary expectation is like a stigma attached, when people start to make guesses that prices is going to fall in the future. Okay, so this is what we call a deflationary spiral. Okay, so make sure you know this by heart, okay, how this actually happened. Okay, so the page 84 actually explain deflationary spiral, okay, in Japan. Okay, so you can read this. Okay, it's called the lost decade. So far so good. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second one. Okay, the second one is what we call real debt burden. Okay, increase in your real debt burden. So, okay, this is a fairly simple illustration. I'm going to show you in a short while. Okay, so the concept of debt burden requires you to understand that, okay, firms and consumers borrow, okay, from banks. That's why there is the concept of debt. When you borrow, you incur debt. Agreed? So, under what circumstance do you borrow? For a consumer, probably when you buy a house or you buy a car, right? Big ticket items. So now you can actually see that in the event of a deflation, let's say, Erica, if you buy a house, okay, what is going to happen to the value of the house, okay, when there's deflation? Is it going to go up or go down? Okay, value of your house is going to depreciate. Now, you remember you took a loan from the bank, right? Okay, is the amount of loan owing to the bank the same, or is it going to depreciate as well? Do the bankers give you discount, okay, when they see that there is, oh, your value of your asset goes down, value of your house goes down? No discount. Okay, so good. Okay, so you're still going to incur a fixed repayment every month to the bank. So in essence, okay, when your asset value goes down and you're incurring the same level of debt, okay, you are going to increase in your real debt burden. Agreed? Okay, so this is from the consumer perspective. Fairly straightforward, right? Now, from the firm's perspective, it's going to be the same. Okay, remember just now what did we mention about profitability of firms during deflation? Does it go up or go down? It goes down, right? And similarly, okay, do you think that the bankers is going to give you on the discount on the previous loan that you borrowed with a fall in profitability? You know that bankers are your fair weather friend, right? Have you heard of the concept of fair weather friend? What is a fair weather friend? Okay, so okay, since we are here, okay, I'll quickly share the story of a fair weather friend. Previously, okay, I was pursuing the career of banking. I do know this concept very well. So fair weather friend means this. Okay, so a banker, I don't know whether you heard this story, okay, is likely to extend you an umbrella or a loan when it's sunny. Okay, but what happens when business starts to get tricky or when it starts to rain? What does a fair weather friend do to the umbrella? Do they lend you a bigger umbrella or do they take back your umbrella? Yes, okay, so this is what we call fair weather friend. Okay, so steer clear away from fair weather friends. Yeah, I think you guys will actually experience that in your lifetime. So same, you can see that despite a fall in profitability, you are going to owe the same amount, fixed repayment. Okay, and therefore you're going to incur a higher debt burden on a real basis. So the whole idea about higher real debt burden is this will suppress future C&I because you're going to incur more in terms of real to pay off your debt. It's going to suppress future C&I. Okay? So know these two by heart. These two are the more common ones. Okay, of course, there are other interpretations, but I'll pick the easier ones for you guys to note. Alright, I am going to move on to the last part about policies. So anything about concerns about deflation that you are not aware of, please let me know. Okay, so we are going to move on to the policies. The policies is fairly straightforward. Remember, we have categorized deflation into harmless or harmful, right? Are there any needs to address harmless deflation? If it is harmless already, no need. Okay, so harmless deflation or deflation that is caused by AS factors, no need to address. So the only deflation that we need to address is what we call a malign deflation or deflation that is caused by a persistent fall in AD. Okay, so in order to address that, we need to promote more AD or what we call expansionary fiscal policy. So remember to expansionary demand side policy, demand side fiscal policy is one of them. I'll cover that in the future. So this patient is suffering from constipation. Okay, you want to prescribe laxative, okay, in order to promote more economic activity. Okay, if you prescribe charcoal pill to them, contractionary demand side policy, lucky bad, right? This patient is never going to visit a toilet any other time soon. Agreed? Okay, so remember, okay, expansionary and contractionary, you need to know when to promote them, when to use them. Right, I'll quickly end off with an exam purpose. So a few things to note for inflation. Make sure you know how to calculate rate of inflation using CPI. Okay, just now I covered, right? For my H1 and H2 students, H2 students will have one more goal. Okay, so they are likely to be tested, okay, together with other macro goals under consequence and concerns, especially for my H2 students. Okay, they can test you together with in essay with other concerns of other macro objectives. H1 mainly short answer questions, unlikely to be messed up. Remember to revise from the perspective of cause, and policy. Okay, this is the suggested approach to revise. And in the future, we will be learning the concept of conflict of goals. Conflict of goals is not difficult, but it requires you to understand all the macro objectives before you can apply. Okay, so we know that in the future, okay, achieving one goal is not necessarily great because it may compromise the other. Okay, I will show you in the future. Okay, so this is the very first goal that we are learning. Okay, make sure you fully understand before we move on to the other goals. Then we can look at the whole thing in totality. Clear? Okay, so with this, okay, I am running really short in time. I am going to ask you guys for a quick favor. Quickly freshen up and come back for your time practice. Okay, when you are back, turn on your webcam. Okay, I also don't want to end too late. Okay? Thanks. Alright, when you are back, you may want to say hi to Spadin. Okay, I'm showing a live feed of Spadin from under my leg. I'm so sorry for the rest of the viewers who don't get to see Spadin because it's an alternate camera. Yeah. Hi Dylan, would you like to say hi to Spadin? Say hi. I'm waving with my leg, you see that? Can y'all see the, can y'all see that? Hi. She's quite well behaved for the time being. She hasn't barked for the... hey, Zach and Erica, you guys can probably make friends. Okay, both of y'all have dogs. Yeah, so Erica has a golden golden shepherd. GSD. What is that again? German Shepherd. Yeah, German Shepherd. Zach has a Singapore special. Okay, Mr. Teo has a annoying bugger called Corgi. Alright, so with that, okay, I'm going to quickly kickstart. Okay, while Spadin continues to sleep. I'm going to require you guys to access the LMS, okay, especially Erica, this is your officially your first lesson. I'd like you guys to access lesson 13. Okay, you should be seeing the same question paper as I do. Okay, on depth and growth. If you are seeing the same question paper, please let me know. Okay, type it out so I know. Okay, well, I say bye to Spadin. Bye bye. Bye bye. Okay, so great. We're all seeing the same question paper. I'm going to give you guys a slight hint. Okay, so this is probably the only hint that you need. We need to define what is stagflation. Okay, so please pen this down. Stagflation, okay, is a type of severe cost push inflation. But the definition is not severe cost push inflation. I'm just giving you a hint. It's a severe cost push inflation. Okay, so with this, it is not a difficult case. I would like you guys to apply what we have learned earlier on, okay, in the next 15 minutes. Right? And with that, okay, I'm going to start the timer. All the best. Right, time's up. Stop writing. And when you are ready, okay, please prepare a green pen for correction purpose. Right, ready? So, as gathered from the earlier classes and batches, okay, it seems like A part 2 is the problematic question. Okay, so as I was sharing with the earlier classes, whenever you experience a case study question, right, play like a pro. Okay, what does a pro do? Okay, the pros always know what to look out for, right? And you always look at the questions first before the extract. Okay, you never start from the front to the end. Okay, that's a game for amateurs. Would you like to be an amateur? You can't afford to be one in A levels. Okay, always start from the back to the front. Alright, so now let's look at the question. We see that A part 2, A1 we have already addressed that. Okay, so I'm not going to talk about A1. A2. With reference to the data, comment on the evidence of stagflation for developing countries. So first of all, we need to identify what question type or requirement is this for this question. For those who have been with me for quite some time, I have mentioned before, right? What is the question requirement for comment? Anybody still remember? Someone brought up two sides. Anything else? Two sides is not that precise. I don't think I use two sides, but I use the concept of what we call a, please pen this down if you haven't, thesis. And what's the opposite of thesis? Antithesis. So if you haven't got this framework right, please copy this down. Thesis and antithesis. We have to start forming thesis and antithesis for this question. So what is a suitable thesis for this? Okay, with reference to data, comment on the evidence. So what is a thesis for this? Alright, remember the difference between thesis and explanation or explain question, okay, is that the explain will always form the thesis. Okay, so the thesis is asking you to explain the causes of cost push inflation or stagflation in developing countries. Explain the evidence, to be more specific. Now, the antithesis here is kind of tricky. Okay, most of the students are not able to form the antithesis. So we have to look at the secondary command word here, which is evidence. So if you were to string this up, the antithesis will suggest that there is insufficient evidence. Okay, please pen this down. It's fairly popular in SOL question when they phrase like that. You want to look out for data inadequacy. Okay, or insufficient evidence that suggests that there is stagflation for developing countries. Okay, so don't be so naive. Don't stick with one side explanation only. Okay, it has to be thesis and antithesis. Is everyone clear? Now let's look at the answer requirement. Alright, if you have your correction pen, okay, you can use it right now. Okay, later on, okay, I will show you how are we going to work backwards. Remember, okay, case studies is a game of reverse engineering. You need to look out for what you need from the extract. Okay, so what are the causes or evidence that suggest that there is cost push inflation, especially for the thesis. Okay, we will find out from the extract later on. Okay, when we look at the answer. Okay, so I'll just quickly address A1. Okay, stagflation refers to what? Okay, a situation that there's rising inflation and slow economic growth or fall in real national output. Okay, please don't define these as cost push inflation, though the meaning is the same. Okay, so this is a fairly simple definition. Okay, I can afford to skip. Now I want to talk about the focus, okay, which is this question. Okay, evidence, comment on the evidence, thesis and antithesis. Alright, so there are two possible theses that you can consider. Okay, the first one, you want to look out for extract 2, which suggests that there is lower fuel subsidy and higher minimum wage. Okay, to be more specific, I believe you can find it here. Okay, these are all developing countries. Do you see that? So, remember, okay, identifying that you need cost push inflation is the very first step. Then you need to rely on what we have covered earlier on here. Okay, what type of cost push inflation is this? Then we can see that, because there is minimum wage, wages are going to be kept higher. It is wage push inflation. Okay, cut in your fuel subsidy. Okay, this is likely related to, it's not imported, okay, but it is going to drive up your domestic production costs. Okay, in that case, okay, this is going to be cost push inflation. So this is how you want to apply. Okay, identifying from the case material cost push inflation and identifying them in the answer. So remember, okay, it's always working backwards. You know that stagflation is asking for cost push inflation. Okay, you know that the thesis requires you to identify evidence. Go and find the evidence. Okay, lower fuel subsidy acts like a tax. Higher minimum wage acts like a higher wage cost. This is going to drive up your production costs. Okay, so the second thesis that you want to consider, okay, is here. Extract 2, South Asia and Africa, okay, due to energy shortage, supply side bottleneck, structural bottleneck. Do you see that? Okay, where is that? Anyone can tell me? You know, I relied on a search function. What's the keyword? Anyone can tell me? Shortages. Shortage. See, this one. So what does it suggest? Okay, it suggests that cost of production is likely to be higher, right? Especially when there's energy shortage. I've mentioned this before earlier, right? So be extra sensitive of utilities, fuel, energy. Because when there's energy shortage, okay, this is going to drive up your price of your import costs, for instance. Okay, or domestically, it's going to drive up your utility costs as well. Cost push inflation. Now, for the antithesis, okay, it's fairly straightforward. Okay, for any form of data inadequacy, you need to identify a specific data that is not present in the extract. Okay, that may complete the whole picture of whether there is stagflation. So you can suggest things like what? Actual growth rate or unemployment rate. Okay, in order to have an accurate judgment whether there is stagflation. So data inadequacy almost always requires you to identify an alternate indicator. Clear? Alright, I'm going to move on to the next question. For part C, how are we going to interpret this question? It's fairly straightforward. One demand, one supply factor that might affect inflation. Alright, so on the surface, a lot of students is going to favor this approach. They see these two keywords. Okay, demand, inflation, supply, inflation. Okay, they will address demand, pull, and cost push. Okay, that's not wrong. Okay, it does fit into the criteria of this question. But this question actually has a broader perspective. Okay, so this question requires you to look into a fact. So a fact does not necessarily means that inflation has to go up. Right? A fact can also mean that there is a fall in price level. or it simply means that inflation is unlikely to happen. Demand pull inflation is unlikely to happen. Cost push inflation is unlikely to happen. Okay, so be mindful of such keywords, okay, that demands broader perspective. Okay, and you don't want to get trapped, okay, by stating one-sided. Although one-sided answer down here does work, increase in that leads to inflation does work. Okay, but when effect comes in, it can work both ways. Is everyone clear? So knowing this, we need to look at extract 2, okay, to find out what are the causes of demand pull, what are the causes of cost push inflation, or what are the demand and supply factors that will reduce AD, okay, or cause your AS curve to shift right or shift down. Okay, this is another alternate interpretation. Now, there are a lot of factors. So remember, always have the end goal in mind, then it's easier to solve the question. You know what to look out for. You are exceptionally sensitive to keywords. Okay, things like supply factor, like energy, resource, wage, fuel subsidy, all these they mentioned that earlier on already. Great. Okay, so having said that, okay, let's quickly look at the answer. So remember just now, okay, I was saying I made a very important assumption for demand pull inflation, right? Okay, so there are many demand factors here. I will show you how I derive them, but they are all obtained from the extract. So the first factor that you want to be concerned about is unemployment. Okay, so you can see this here. Yeah, I just want to point out, okay, unemployment. So how is unemployment going to come into the picture? Okay, we can see that when there is persistent unemployment, as suggested in the extract 2, this might suggest that there is spare capacity. And when there is spare capacity, this tells us that it's unlikely that there is demand pull inflation. They are likely to be producing at the Keynesian region. This is how we reverse engineer. Clear so far? The second demand factor that you can consider is rapid credit growth. Okay, this is obtained from the extract as well. I did not invent any of this. Okay, so remember, you have to try your best to look out from the extract. What are the determinants of AD that is affected? Or you need to deduce. Okay, what you learn in lecture notes and what you see in extract, okay, you get to combine them. Okay, so it is all about practice and having extra sensitivity to keywords. So rapid growth is a concept that's related to monetary policy. I'm not going to spend more time here. There's a time to come. When you learn monetary policy, then you will build the awareness and the sensitivity of such keywords. Okay, so you can put it as a star for the future. Okay, so rapid growth relates to money supply and cost of borrowing. So with an expansion of your money supply, this will lower your interest rate or cost of borrowing. This will promote C&I. And if you want to showcase that you are a proficient student, and then you want to insert an assumption. What was the key assumption that I have been saying so far about demand pull inflation arising? Type it out now. Okay, what do you have to assume? Okay, spare capacity is exhausted. And then you can showcase that you are a good student. Okay, you understood the concepts well. Okay, so the third point is inflationary expectation. Oh yes, you can see here. Inflationary expectation right here, right? So how does it come into the picture? Remember just now we covered the concept of deflationary expectation, right? It works the other way. So if you expect future prices to go up tomorrow, what would you do? You will probably consume more today. Why? Because in the future, your purchasing power will be eroded, which means that your present purchasing power will be higher. So might as well spend more today. So you often encounter this point in your lecture notes. Okay, but you will find that it's difficult to apply. Okay, so remember, it's all about understanding, okay, what is this point in lecture, not pure memory work. Okay, so relate this to future purchasing power. And this will, you want to assume that there is a lack of spare capacity exhausted, and this will lead to demand pool inflation. Is everyone clear on how to derive all these 3 points? If there are any other points that you have uncovered, you can stay back and ask me later. For the viewers who don't have direct access, you can type it out on the comment segment. Okay, I will check. Okay, I'll get back to you guys. So the supply factors are significantly easier. Okay, they are all from extract 2. So the first one is contained energy and food prices. I mentioned this before, right? Remember, energy, food, raw materials, all these are highly susceptible to imported cost push inflation. Okay, and where can we get this from? Here. So a lot of students don't understand what is containment. Containment means what? Okay, you keep it in check. It simply means that you prevent further price growth in these areas. So you can see, okay, that the easing of commodity prices will ease the cost of production to import raw materials. So remember, especially for cost push inflation, there's a very high chance you need to use the COP word. Okay, check your answer whether you have the COP word with you. Okay. There's a very, very high chance. And you have to relate this to cost push inflation. You do not need to break it down into short run or long run. Okay, you just need to identify the COP word here. Later on, you will see that I'll be using the COP word fairly rampantly. Okay, so the second keyword that is present that was used earlier on is the minimum wage. Okay, we have used that earlier on. Okay, you can also consider this. Okay, this is a duplicated point. Okay, and you can illustrate this as labor costs going up and higher cost of production, cost push inflation. Okay, lower fuel subsidy also works. You can see this. Okay, when there is a depletion of or lower fuel subsidies, this is an indirect tax. This works like an indirect tax. Okay, when you lower fuel subsidies, it acts like an indirect tax. This drives up your cost of production. Okay, so cost push inflation will happen. I've mentioned this. Fuel is you got to be sensitive about fuel. Okay, more or less it will drive up cost of production because you use fuel to produce almost everything. Okay, so one set of demand and one set of supply factors is going to be sufficient. Clear? Alright, so with this, okay, I'm going to call it a day. For the existing students with me right now, if you have any questions for me, please stay back and ask me. Okay, I will leave the room open for the next 5 minutes. For the viewers who do not have direct access, if you want to clarify something, drop it at the comment segment. Alright, so with this, okay, I thank you all of you for spending the past 2 hours of practice with me.